We all know the word race, but do we really know what it means or how it's used in the creation of the other? Toni Morrison, author of The Origin of Others, attempts to bring the realities of race and the other into light, using personal experience, popular literature, and common understanding of race to do so. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the forward author of this work, notes Morrison's usage of race and racism to approach the process of othering. Coates also notes that, while Morrison primarily focuses on the othering in terms of the enslaved and the enslaver, this concept is broadly applicable across racial and cultural groups. The first of 6 chapters, Romanticizing Slavery, discusses Morrison's experience romanticizing race, along with the romanticizing of slavery within medicine, science, and literature. Scientific racism is a method in which people in power use arbitrary biological traits to prove distinctions between racial groups. Morrison utilizes Dr. Samuel Cartwright's 1851 report on the diseases and physical peculiarities of the Negro race as evidence of scientific racism. He used factors like natural indolence, lessened lung capacity, and black blood to suggest that enslaved people are a burden and a benefit to white slave owners. Morrison proceeded to use more well-known works like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and journals written by Thomas Thistlewood, a slave owner. These works supported Morrison's argument that romanticizing slavery was for the benefit of white people, despite the fact that the writings were focused on black enslaved peoples. The next chapter, Being or Becoming the Stranger, focuses on one becoming the other. Morrison recounts a time when she met a black fisherwoman but never saw her again. In this vulnerable state, Morrison admits that othering is not necessarily always white against black. Instead, othering comes from what we fear in ourselves. In The Color Fetish, Morrison explores literature's fascination with skin color to express character or to drive the narrative. Essentially, literature utilizes the one-drop rule, the use of the N-word, and exoticism of color to develop an other. Morrison mentions work from Faulkner and Hemingway, as well as colorism within the law. Morrison returns to biological ideas of race and configurations of blackness. She claims that definitions of black are hung on the hooks of slippery science and invention. Using Oklahoma's black towns, she explains the gray areas between being white and black, as those towns were inhabited by non-black people who identified as black in order to have a home. Through the course of her book, Morrison explains the lack of biological evidence to support a black race. There's also a lack of needing evidence to prove that a black race exists. These towns were inhabited by black people and non-black people, all of whom identified as black to receive government resources. In the next chapter, Narrating the Other, Morrison delves into more recent examples of othering. During her time at Random House Publishing, Morrison was told by a superior that black authors sold less books due to black people buying less books. Morrison explains her solution, which was to create works directed at the black community. In The Foreigner's Home, Morrison explores a contemporary method of othering seen daily. Mass migration promotes feelings of being threatened, while also showing successes in globalization. She argues that migration highlights the uneasiness we feel with our own foreignness, and with our sense of a lack of belonging. These feelings tie back to Morrison's earlier arguments of creating an other due to fearing what we see in ourselves. Morrison ends her book by suggesting that the pressures felt through transglobalization can cause us to continue denying the foreigner in ourselves, which furthers the idea of the other. Morrison's work lacks biological evidence from scientific racists. This supports the notion that race is not biological, but socially constructed. It also goes to show how racists and scientific racists alike don't provide or require biological evidence to support their claim of biologic race. Morrison depicts how ideas of race detrimentally affect culture and society. She gives numerous real-world examples throughout the book. In Configurations of Blackness, Morrison lists 13 black people, all murdered because of racial perceptions held by white people. Throughout the book, Morrison describes many of her novels, all of which she wrote to address a problem also addressed in The Origin of Others. Morrison's book offers insight into the creation, sustaining, and promotion of othering. Importantly, she dissects the other into what she suggests it really is: misinformation, racism, and fear.